Okay, part 2 of the writing meme 40 questions that I started last night. I hope my answers will be coherent tonight because I'm kind of not quite feeling the best. Partly it's that time of the month, and partly I had to work this afternoon, and Friday afternoons are a little bit crazy, although this one was a little bit odd for Friday because it wasn't quite as wacky as most Fridays are, but that doesn't mean the store was dead either, so I might not be quite the most quick on the draw, and if I was planning to do 10 questions, I might only do 5, but we'll see what I have the spoons for. I kind of did a little washing the spoons, as I call it, when I try and recharge my batteries when I'm having a particularly rough time of things, so we'll see what I come up with. Okay. Starting off with, okay, number 13. What's the best writing advice you've ever come across? My first thought is Neil Gaiman's make good art. I suppose it doesn't necessarily have to be good art, just make art, but he has this whole little piece that I think was made into a little inspirational book, amongst other things, where he just basically tells people, create things, tap into into your inner strengths and just put it on the paper, whatever it is that inspires you, whatever it is that fires you up, So, sometimes in order to get going, sometimes you just have to make things. And that's what I do. I mean, I've got a few fics that they're not exactly my best writing, but I'm glad I put them out there because, sometimes you just gotta throw something out there, even if it's, not exactly Shakespeare. Not that any of my stuff is Shakespeare, but, you know, sometimes just putting things out there is better than just, keeping it all bottled up inside you. The other bit of writing advice, not necessarily writing advice, but publishing advice. I got this at the first New England Horror Writers Festival that was at our library this past October. And I was chatting with one of the writers that was there, a fellow by the name of T. Stevens. Big scary guy. I mean, he'd worked variously as a truck driver and a bar bouncer, and I think he'd been a private investigator, so kind of a badass. And I was talking to him about, how I've been scribbling things for a long time and just trying to get up the nerve to get published, and he asked me, well, what do you do for work? And I said, well, I've worked grocery retail for 13 years. And he looks me in the eye, and I mean, looks me in the eye. And he says to me, if you can work grocery retail for 13 years, you can get published. And that's kind of, that really has got me going, trying to find some venue to get my stuff published. Albeit that means having to write some original stories and, get something out there that I actually can get published. But that's one of the things that really lit a fire under me, and I keep that in mind when I'm feeling really discouraged with my stuff. Okay. Number 14. What's the worst writing advice you've ever come across? Probably the most overused bit of writing advice, I think, and to me it's the worst, is write what you know. What does that even mean? I mean, sure, you gotta do, if you're writing something unfamiliar, it helps to do research, but I think deep down, we all know what it's like to experience certain emotions. Certain sensations, certain experiences, whether you experience it as a human being, or, I don't know, a space alien, or, an international spy, or whatnot. So if you can convey the feel of something, even if you may not get all the nitty-gritty details just right, you wouldn't... writing a spy novel would be... I mean, if you went into all the, little twiddly fine points, that could get really boring, especially because I'm told that real spy work is more like being in a Len Deighton novel where you have to deal with obstructive bureaucrats more than you have to deal with, evil spies from the other side of the, you know, whatever it is that you're spying on. But if you're really got nitpicky about it, you might bog it down with, you know, twiddly, boring details that would just bog down the story. Anyway. But, on the other hand, I'm thinking, you know, when I hear that, write what you know guff, it's like, really? If I wrote, you know, if I stuck to exactly what I know, I'd be writing about being homeschooled and writing, you know, and which is interesting. But it can be just as dull as regular school. Working grocery retail, which, you know, has its high moments sometimes when you've got a strange customer giving you grief, and you know, sometimes you just have to stand back after they're gone and just laugh about, you know, well, that person was a lovely bunch of lollipops. But, you know, if I stuck solely to the things that I know from experience, I won't say I haven't had a lot of experience, but not the kind of experience that I think really, well, doesn't go into novels. Doesn't stop me from writing about people encountering Lovecraftian beasties in grocery stores. Case in point, the Dunwich Horror rewrite that I have sitting on my hard drive needing to be revised and sent out. Speaking of getting published, I reframed the story set in a grocery store. the modern day analog of Lavinia Waitley doing her grocery shopping with her very strange looking little kid. And boy, the Waitleys buy an awful lot of raw meat from the meat department. What do they do with it all? You know? Sorry, something in my throat. So, the way I look at it is, if you got really tunnel visiony about the write what you know, that you know, the only spy novels would be written by actual spies. The only vampire novels would actually be written by vampires. I suppose some of the vampire lifestylers could do it, but they're not exactly really 700-year-old vampires, you know? Okay. Number 15. If you could choose one of your fics to be filmed, which would you choose? I've often thought... I often think of some of my cutscene fics as being things that could have been filmed. And I have quite a number of those that I wish had been filmed. The one that really played out film-like in my head as I was writing it was one that I wrote for the Zombie Ficathon. I believe the title is Never Play with Dead Things. It's a Torchwood fanfic that it's set at it starts at the end of the events of the episode entitled Cyberwoman, and it's kind of a turn right sort of story, or turn left story, whatever you want to call it, going by the the Doctor Who episode of that same title. The premise was that Yanto doesn't follow through on Jack's orders to kill his girlfriend, who had been partially cyberized and then had put her own brain inside the body of another woman. And the premise was, you know, what happens? Does that poor girl become a zombie? So I played with that, and it really did play, I won't exactly say like a George Romero movie, but it wound up being a really visual story. I'm really proud of how it came out. And it's one of those I wish it could be filmed. I mean, it could be a lot of fun. You know, perhaps partly because there is a scene in it with, it's heavily, you know, I won't say heavily implied, but the start of a scene with Jack Harkness fighting zombies. Which, you know, we get just the start of it, and it could be, you know, it could be one of those things that would be, you know, you get the beginning of it, but then it cuts to the end, because I'm terrible at writing action scenes. So you could, you know, imply that, you know, a whole bloody mess goes down. Actually, a whole bloody mess is implied to have gone down because, you know, the team comes down to the hub and they find Oh, there's a terrible mess in the morgue, or well, not exactly the morgue, the containment section for the various persons that they have in cryo storage or whatever it is. That winds up being a bloody mess, literally. That could get very interesting. I mean, it wound up being a very visual story when I was writing it, and it's one of those that I would love to have seen filmed. Although, I also have a director's cut version where I changed the ending. I mean, the story itself has not exactly a happy ending, or it's a good ending. You know, things get, you know, the zombie plague gets stopped in its tracks, so to speak. I also have another ending that I'm working on. I call it the George Romero remix ending, where things get messier. I mean, not, you know, zombie plague messier, but things happen. I'm not going to reveal the things that happen because one of these days I'm going to release the actual story because it's completed. It's sitting in draft on a locked entry on my journal. It just needs to be released into the light of day for everyone to see. Okay. 16. If you could only write one pairing for the rest of your life, which pairing would it be? This is a tough question because there are some pairings that I will write, but I'm not, you know, pairing isn't the be-all and end-all of my writing. I mean, I just, you know, I feel like, you know, romance and things like that are not the be-all and end-all of life. I mean, can't we have friendshipping, please? This is a bit of a let's say a limiting question, but because I tend to switch around between fandoms depending on my mood, depending on what's inspiring me. One pairing that I do find myself, that I keep gravitating to, although I doubt that I will write it for the rest of my life. I do write a lot, and I mean quite a lot, of Yami no Matsuei fanfics, focusing either on Hisoka and Suzuki, or Muraki and Suzuki, because they're both very interesting pairings in their own right. And they both have very interesting dynamics. You could say that, you know, Hisoka and Suzuki, they belong together. You know, however, whatever form the relationship takes, you know, whatever form it takes. It's like these two, I won't say they need each other, but they're very good for each other because, you know, Suzuki gets Hisoka to lighten up, and Hisoka gets Suzuki to take things a little more seriously and clean up his act a little more. But, you know, without detracting from Suzuki's goofiness and just all around, you know, he's annoying, but he's cute, and darn it, you can't help but like him for it, you know? Whereas Muraki and Suzuki, it kind of defines... I always say it's the definition of bad romance, but when I first heard the Lady Gaga song of that title, I immediately thought of those two. I was like, this song is about those two. It's not a healthy dynamic. I mean, and, you know, however you slice it, but still there is a good aspect to it because at least Suzuki gets it. You know, Muraki's different. He's not like, he's more than human and in some ways less than human. And his own inner demons, his own self is his own worst enemy. Plus, Suzuki knows what it's like to be I don't want to say misunderstood, but just, you know, have people look at you and think you're a freak, you know? Also, the same could be applied to Suzuki and Hisoka, which is another reason why that pairing works so well, because these are damaged, predator human beings, I guess is a word for them, because, you know, they're more than human. They're semi-immortal, or all but immortal, or all but completely immortal. Really hard to permanently damage. Don't say it's a love triangle, because it's more like a love V, because saying it's a triangle implies that there's something going on between two people in that dynamic, and we're not going there. however you slice it. So, that's the closest to the pairings that I would write more of if I was going to continue writing. Not saying confine myself to just one pairing, but having the ones that I return to the most, we'll say. Number 17. Do you write your story start to finish, or do you write scenes out of order? That depends on the story. Sometimes I write the scenes out of order as the ideas come to me, and then I find a way to fit them all together. Other times I do write stuff start to finish. It really depends on how the project presents itself to me. I mean, it's a process. And not every story is going to have exactly the same process. I mean, not every story should have the same process, you know? Otherwise, you get machine-like about your writing, and that's never a good thing. Yeah. So, it's a good idea to mix it up, you know? It's a good idea to not get it in a rut, I think, or not, you know, confine yourself to just one way of doing things, because there never is one way of doing things. Plus, you know, depending on how my frame of mind is, the process that worked for this story here may not work for this story over here that I'm working on now, so. 18. Do you use any tools like worksheets or outlines? I do take notes on characters and situations and whatnot. I do jot things down into journals and whatnot, you know, little ones. But I found that I'm a bit like Terry Pratchett. I can't work with an outline. Because when I try to work with an outline, it just winds up feeling really mechanical and forced and just... I'm not happy with the end result. It just feels too processed. You know? It's like, instead of it coming out as, you know, a lovely organic cheese, it comes out as Velveeta. And what the hell is Velveeta? Anyway. Sorry. So, I actually did write a novel using the outlines and the this and the that and the other thing, and I hated it. I mean, I just was reading, you know, read it over after I finished it, and I was like, this is the most mechanical junk I ever saw. And I think I either burned it or put the pages in the recycling. The story is no longer extant. Either, you know, however I just dispose of it, but it's no longer with us. I'm probably the better for it. 19. Stephen King once said that his muse is a man who lives in the basement. Do you have a muse? I tend to do the thing where I've spoken about this elsewhere, but I do the thing where I kind of envision myself almost as a reporter or something like that, interviewing the character about what happened in this incident that I'm thinking of. You know, just, you know, sit down and ask them, well, what happened? You know, and sometimes they can get very interesting. I mean, Suzuki's only too happy to share what happened. I mean, either, you know, once they get, you know, getting things off his chest, or just, you know, you're not gonna believe the crazy stuff that just happened to me. Yikes! You know? Others can get a little more difficult. Rocky will tell you some of it, but he won't tell you everything, and he'll, you know, skirt around stuff and, you know, just be really, you know, I'm only going to tell you a little bit about this. You're going to have to, you know, to find out the rest, and I'm going to have to make you pay for it. Sneaky bastard. So, and then you get others. There's characters I want to write stories for, but they refuse to share them with. I have a few ideas for some Frighteners fanfic right now. Yes, dealing specifically with Milton Dammers and his really twisted backstory, but you think he's gonna tell me about it? Half the time he's telling me coldly that, you know, these things have been redacted. You know, the stuff is on file with the FBI, but they're not about to share it, and neither is he. And then there's a few Torchwood fics that I'd like to write, but Jack was telling me, I'd like to tell you, but I'd have to retcon you after I did. So, I have my ways of getting him to talk, though. No, not those ways. Describe your perfect writing conditions. You know, I like to try and be the person that, I won't say could write in any conditions, but I try not to let myself get hung up on, things have to be just so in order for me to write well. I've written in busy coffee shops. I've written on buses. I've written, in the backseat of my dad's car while we're going on a trip somewhere. I've, jotted things at work when there's a lull. I've written things curled up under my covers. I've written things outside on a bright sunny day. I've written things during hurricanes. It's if I had to say there was a perfect writing condition, it's when I have the time and the energy in which to write. It's like one, and sometimes getting those two things at the same time, it's not necessarily, it doesn't always happen, and that can get a little frustrating, but you do what you can. 21. How many times do you usually revise your fic chapter before posting? I will go through it and I will tighten things up and I'll correct any, grammatical or spelling errors or whatnot, and tighten up, declunk some clunky sentences. But I try not to go crazy because to me revision is one of those things that you can tinker with stuff, but you can also drive yourself into the loony bin with revising, because there's some authors that get really bowel retentive about it, and I think it's I think you can get too bogged down with the details if you get too hung up on revising. So it's like I try and I think there's such a thing as over revising. I think some writers do that, and it may not necessarily be a good thing. Okay, choose a passage from one of your earlier fics and edit it into your current writing style. I guess that's neither here nor there. I guess that's one that you actually have to do some writing with. And okay, I'll talk about remixes here. There's times when I have come across stories that, okay, I could tell this a little bit differently, and I'll take it and switch things up a little bit, tweak things, add things that weren't there before, cut things out that aren't working for whatever reason, and I will post it as a remix. And I'll give it some kind of funky little subtitle, like, I spoke a little while ago about the Torchwood Zombie story that I'm calling, I've got the alternate take on it that I'm calling it the George Romero Director's Cut remix. I did a Yami no Matsue fanfic where it had been a not quite 100-word drabble, and I tightened it up to be a full 100-word drabble, and for some reason, it was a Meraki fic, and for some reason I chose to give it the subtitle, the I Am the Danger remix. I guess I must have been watching Breaking Bad at the time. Because I do love that line, I am the danger. There was a Torchwood Miracle Day fic that it started out as a 100-word drabble, and I somehow revised it up into, I think it was like upwards of 500 words. And I wound up calling it the Highway to Hell remix. I guess I use a lot of quotes and song titles and in pop culture in-joke type things as my remix subtitles, which is fun to do because, it jumps out at you that way. 23. If you were to revise one of your older fics from start to finish, which would it be and why? Honestly, I can't think of one that I would revise. I mean, there are stories that I wound up abandoning because I decided, okay, I don't hate this story, but I don't love it as much as I did, so it's going to be out there for people to read, but I'm not necessarily going to go back and reread it. It's grown up and it's on its own, and, it doesn't call right to me, so I'm just going to give it its own space. Honestly, I can't think of any. I think there may be one or two supernatural fics from the early days of when I started writing stuff for Comment Fic, on LiveJournal that I might go and tighten up, but they're not going to get remixed anytime soon, as far as as far as I can tell. Have you ever deleted one of your published fics? I haven't deleted anything. You can see what I said earlier. Per what I said just a moment ago. But there are fics. I more or less have abandoned my fanfic.net account. I had trouble with the login, and I almost got some kind of malware from the site. So I've pretty much said goodbye to that site. I mean, I don't hate it. I haven't taken down my account. It's just I don't go back and update things, and I don't post on there anymore. Plus, I like the format on Archive of Our Own much better than I do the archiving things on fanfic.net. So yeah, I'm in a plus I'm kind of archiving a lot of my stories onto my personal journal, but my fic journal. So I've got other venues where I'm posting stuff, so it's not necessarily going on fanfiction.net. I mean, fanfiction.net is great for getting traffic and getting reviews, but quality to quantity ratio is really, Sturgeon's Law really applies there. Not to say that there aren't clunker fics on Archive of Our Own, but it seems like the quality skews towards being higher. The ratio tends to be better on Archive of Our Own, so that's usually where a lot of my stuff ends up if it's not already on the fic journal. So, what else? What do you look for in a beta reader? I really don't do beta readers, because the one time I did have a beta reader, I sent the fic to them, they said they'd read it, I never heard back from them. I poked them to hear about, see what they thought about it, never heard back from them. It was one of those things that just kept, so I decided, okay, never doing the beta reader thing, ever. It really put me off getting a beta reader. Which, okay, if you want to do a beta reader, good on you. I'm just one of those that, once burned, twice shy, and, so. Oh, and the one time that I did, it was like I had a deadline that I had to reach. Never heard back from them in time for the deadline, and wound up not being able to post the story, so that really kind of bummed me out, so. Do you beta yourself? If so, what kind of beta are you? Now, if somebody asks me to beta read stuff, I'm happy to do it. I mean, I'm a kind beta reader. I'm not going to. I mean, I might suggest things that could be tightened up, but I don't go crazy with it because I've seen some people have their stuff get beta read by people that just were. It's like getting your fic examined by a Dalek. Exterminate this fanfic! And yes, it was a Doctor Who fanfic. This poor person was trying to get beta read, and so I try to be really kind about it because there's a lot of people that are nitpicky about fanfiction, and it gets a bit ridiculous sometimes. It's like, okay, yeah, this does need to be tightened up, but this is supposed to be about having fun. Can't you just let us have fun once in a while? So, plus, as long as things aren't getting completely out of character, it gets, I mean, I've seen some really bad OOC stories back in the day. So, things that it was like, what? Are these even the same characters? But, there's a certain amount of character behavior leeway. So it's like, I try not to be too picky about, the voice of the character or whatnot, because, people are going to react in a certain way, but it's not going to be completely, you put someone in a different set of circumstances. It's, I won't say their reaction is always going to be different, but there's just sometimes real life people will act out of character, depending on how they're feeling or what kind of day they're having, or I mean, there's some people that are just plain unpredictable. See also yours truly. 27. How do you feel about collaborations? Collaborations are great if, you can both stay on the same page and, you keep track of what's going on. I have tried to do collaborations and didn't necessarily always work out. I would love to do a round robin type story, where one person writes a chapter and hands it off to the next person who writes a chapter and then hands it off to another person and so on and so forth. Hasn't happened yet, but defining word being yet. And I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Wow, I got more accomplished than I expected, so let's see what I can do tomorrow.